Hey friends, welcome back to another Seed Talk with Lisa and Layne. Hey Layne.
Hello, everyone.
So we're really happy to be here today. It's crisp fall in southeastern Virginia. So it was 47 degrees here at my house, Layne. How cold was it at yours this morning when y'all woke up?
It was actually in the 40s here too, and I definitely noticed a chill in the air, and I needed to put on like a little bit of a light jacket, which I liked. I like being cold and having to put some layers on.
Me too. I'm all about being chilly. So let's, before we jump into what Layne has rolled up for us today, friends, if you want to learn more about the work that we do here at the Gardener's Workshop, you can learn about all of it over at gardenersworkshop.com, where our fully stocked online garden shop, including all the seeds you hear us mention and the seed starting equipment, as well as online courses. We have a library full of courses for you, whether you're a home gardener, a budding flower farmer, or a flower farmer that's looking to scale their business. So we invite you to go over there and check that out. So Layne, today, what are we going to talk about?
So, we're going to be talking about a topic that we get this question a lot. Many people, obviously, if you're growing flowers from seed or otherwise, you need to use some sort of support for these flowers so that the stems stay nice and tall and straight and they don't topple over in storms, or they're less likely to topple over in storms. And a lot of people use plant support netting, something like Hortonova, which is a plastic mesh material. And they're wondering, what do I do when I'm done with this netting for the season? Can I actually reuse it? Or do I need to throw it away and start over next year? And if I want to reuse it, how do I go about getting it off of the plants and storing it so that it's the easiest, most convenient, and it's ready to go the next season?
Those are all great questions. Let's hit it.
All right. Okay, so the first thing I wanted to mention is that, Lisa, out at the farm, you primarily just use flower support netting, right? You don't do anything else like twine, corrals, or any other sorts of supports.
Sure. So I have certainly tried other ways of doing it, but I always have come back to flower support netting. It's quicker, easier to install, and I find it to be the most effective for overall plant support.
And you do actually reuse your netting from year to year, right, Lisa? You don't just throw it out after one season of use.
Oh, sure. I mean, there is the occasion where something will happen to it, but in general, yes, we use it from year to year.
Yeah, and that's better for the environment, and it's also better money-wise. It saves you money. So it's great to learn how you can actually save this netting to use it from season to season.
Right.
Okay, so the first step when you're going to remove your netting is actually to go ahead and remove whatever stakes you were using to hold that up and have it taut.
Sure. And so, friends, I just want to remind everybody, if you're listening to this on a podcast, if you head over to our YouTube channel, Layne always puts together a beautiful slideshow, and we are looking at a beautiful summer garden in full bloom, which shows flower support netting in use and the stakes.
Yes.
So, yes, in the process of to start removing it, the first thing we do is go along and remove all of the stakes first.
And you do save the stakes as well, Lisa.
Yes, we that's another thing. We've used different items or different products, I guess, through the years. And I love using T-post, which are metal, but they are definitely more costly. So, we like try to buy a few every year because they tend to last the longest, have the longest life. But what I typically use are 1.5 to 2 inch square oak stakes, which I find at like construction, not like a big box store, like, those types of where you go as a retail person, but a place where contractors go to buy products. Oftentimes you'll find these 48-inch, 1.5 by 2 inch oak stakes. And that's what we typically use. I buy them by the bundle and I get about 2 years out of them, but they do rot ultimately.
Right. Okay, so after you've removed the stakes, the next step is just to kind of walk along your bed and start to lift that netting up off of the plants.
Yes. And I think what most of us, because I tried the same thing, thinking a lot of times people lift just the end and then just try to pull it off, by pulling left or right. But actually walking along and leaving the netting on the bed, but simply lifting it up, sometimes putting your hands underneath the netting and extending your arms and just motioning up. This works really well with two people. One person can do it, obviously, because I've done it many, many times, but it's definitely an easier process when there's somebody on the opposite side of the bed doing the very same spot that you're doing, just lifting the netting straight up.
Yeah. And this also is easier if you have a bed that you've actually been using as a cutting garden and it's actually cut cleaner. There's not as many big flower heads that are left over, and there's not a ton of super tall, branchy growth coming through the netting. But if you do encounter anything that's kind of sticking up through the netting that makes it hard to pull it through, just obviously snip that off and get it out of the way.
And in addition to that, so you're right, the bed that's pictured here in the slides was actually a demonstration bed, so it was not cut clean. The real key for the easiest, most effective removal is to remove the netting the day you decide this bed is done being harvested, in place of just walking off and leaving it. And then the weeds really just quickly grow up through the netting, and that really makes it so much harder. So sometimes I've been known, even during harvest, to kind of like put down my clippers, stop, pop the stakes out, which really don't take long, and just lift the netting before I even move on. And then somebody comes along and rolls it up, because leaving it is where the real headache comes in.
Right. And again, we're talking about lifting that netting up vertically, not trying to pull it off sideways, like you mentioned before,
Right.
Lisa.
Right. Correct.
Okay, so once you've gone along and you kind of have that netting lifted up a little off the plants, then you can start walking back along that bed and sort of rolling it up.
Yes. And I find we've done a lot of different ways on this too. Sometimes, Bobo always liked to roll it up on a piece of cardboard or something. But we find that that just isn't really necessary. If you've loosened it properly and it's just laying on top of the bed and we just begin the roll and roll it up on itself, it's just easier to store. And it just really creates a really easy to use again item.
Right. And again, if you have anything that's in the way, obviously just snip that and get it out of the way so you can keep rolling. Do you tend to roll by yourself, Lisa, when you're doing like a long bed?
I do. I all those years, for the first 10 or 12 years, literally, I worked my farm by myself. I had people that helped me at the markets, and I learned pretty much how to do everything efficiently and by myself. And sometimes you just really don't need, some jobs are helpful to have a second pair of hands. Other times it's just easier to stop and do it yourself. And I actually install netting alone, as well as put down row covers. I just find it so much easier, and taking the netting off really works well with one person.
Yeah. Okay, so then once you've gotten to the end of the bed, you have your roll of netting that's ready to go. It's a good idea to try to secure it down with some sort of tape. And then another little tip is to write the length of that netting as well, so that you know next year when you go to grab it, you know what length you're dealing with before you unroll it.
Sure. And that's, it always makes me remember why I really love having all of my beds the same length, which is not the case for us right now, because that means all of your netting, all of your row cover, it all is interchangeable. But what we do is just take a piece of masking tape, and tape the end to itself, so it holds it closed, and just write full length bed, half bed, shorty, whatever. So yeah, because it is kind of a headache next year if you don't mark them somehow.
Yeah, and especially in a home garden setting, even like you said, with something like row cover, I have little pieces that I use here and there, and I always try to note how long they are so that I know the next year. But that's a really good point, that in a farm setting, if you can keep everything standardized, that just makes it a lot easier for even something as simple as storing your netting.
Yep.
Lisa, do you leave it in this big roll, or do you like to try to compress it or fold it in any way, or does it just stay in this roll formation?
So we, your goal first off is that was a long bed. That was probably a 90-foot bed that I took that off of. So it's a big piece. But I will say, when you first start it, to start it as tight as you can and keep that tightness for the first 10 or 15 feet. makes a much more compact roll versus what we're looking at on the slide, which is probably about an 18-inch or 24-inch diameter. We don't compress them. We've created a space here on the farm out of UV rays are what break down row cover and netting. And so every hour they're not in use that you can store them out of direct sunlight adds life to the product. So one of the outbuildings we have that we affectionately call the inn, that's one of the corners. We just pile those up very uniformly so they're easy to grab and go. But, you know, it's just such a job to keep it from getting tangled. And these rolls really do that. Any further work, I'd be a little afraid of.
And then the final step is just like Lisa just touched on, storing that netting safely indoors until you need it for the next season or whenever the next time you end up needing it. And safely indoors also means not just out of the elements, like Lisa mentioned, out of UV rays, but also out of the way of wildlife or animals that could get tangled in it.
Oh,
birds,
yes.
snakes, cats. So just store it somewhere where there's not going to be any risk of anything happening to someone should they encounter it.
I totally agree with that, Layne. And I also am really like to help people understand how to install netting properly to help prevent any incidents like that, animals getting caught in it. It's oftentimes loose netting that happens with. And I see a lot of loose netting installed in gardens and farms and dangling. You know, it was too wide for the bed. And instead of cutting the edges off, they leave them dangling. Those are traps for people and animals. And
oh, yes,
we do not practice that at all. And yeah, that's a really great point.
How many years do you find that you're able to reuse netting for typically?
I mean, netting longer than any other product we reuse, probably 3 to 4 years. Beyond that, and it's not even that it breaks down, it's that you know, you lose track of how long it is and it constantly gets passed over and doesn't get used. So it holds up for a really that netting is super strong. We used it all of our netting purposes, including single layer. We've never double layered netting. When it's installed properly with strong enough stakes, tauntly, it holds up. Even dahlias. We grew dahlias for years. So it really holds up really well. It really is slow to break down from the environment.
And what would cause you to call it quits on a piece of netting?
Good question. Because this is what I've learned. If there are holes along the side, that's a problem because that helps. That's where the stakes are installed. And if there is one hole in a 10-foot run along the side between stakes, it affects how taut it is. A hole in the center doesn't really bother me as much as if it's got holes on the side, you're out of there.
Okay, well, that was it for this episode. It was just a little quick one. We just want to encourage you to try to save that floral support netting if you're using it, and hopefully you give that a try. And thank you so much for joining us again. We appreciate all of our viewers and listeners, and we love when you leave likes and comments over on YouTube or ratings and reviews over in a podcast app. And wherever you're watching or listening, just make sure to follow or subscribe so you won't miss any of our future episodes.
So friends, thanks so much for joining us. And until we meet again, ciao.
Bye.